Hello and welcome to the first lecture on intergroup bias, where we're going to be talking about definitions. So the first thing to do is give a warning. And that warning is probably something that you're expecting to hear, which is that this chapter is pretty much the most sensitive chapter we'll be learning about this semester. And that's because there are still many forms of culturally accepted intergroup bias. And people are very sensitive to their own negative experiences. But there are others who feel that some people use accusations of intergroup bias as a scapegoat and say that intergroup bias has prevented them from achieving when really it was that they weren't working hard. And there's truth to both sides. But our job in this class is not to say who is wrong or right, or who experienced worse things. Our job is to learn the definitions, types, causes, and consequences of intergroup bias, and then we can talk about it while honoring everyone's right to have different opinions. So again, our position is not to judge, but it's to learn more about this so we can move forward and have intelligent academic discussions about the topic. And that's what we'll be doing in class. So the point of these videos is to educate everybody so we're all on the same page and understand the scope of what we're talking about, not to say that one group was wrong or one group was right. And then we will talk about it in class respectfully and be able to have, I hope, a good conversation about intergroup bias in today's society. Definitions, I'll start talking about the terms I'll be using this class. And I'll be using the terms black and white versus African American and Caucasian American, and here's why. If I use the word African American, I am only talking about people who are American and who have African ancestry. And that's actually not as big of a population as people who we would like to talk about. So for example, if I say African American, that doesn't include people who have African ancestry who live in Great Britain. And it certainly doesn't include people who live in Australia who have Aboriginal ancestry. They would consider themselves neither African nor American. So in this class, I'll be using the term black because I believe it is a more inclusive word that we can use, and we can then talk about everybody's whose experiences we think are relevant. So what are stereotypes? Stereotypes are beliefs about a group. So they come from somebody's head. And they're generally negative. So the idea that women are too emotional to be good leaders is a negative stereotype. But they can also be neutral. So somebody might believe that Latinos all have large families, so that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. And they can be positive. People can believe that gay men are always stylish. So stereotypes are just beliefs that people have. Okay, prejudice is the feelings or attitude somebody has about a group. And so that's why I have it kind of pointing to the heart. This is how you feel. So a pretty common example of prejudice is to say, I don't like Muslims. So prejudice is generally negative, but can also be positive. So somebody could say, I like Asian women. And while we might consider that a positive prejudice, the experience of that can actually be negative. It cannot feel good to experience that. So I'm going to have you pause this video and watch this video that I have linked to here. It's a funny video. It will probably make you laugh, but I think you'll understand more about how the experience can be negative. And once you finish watching that, come back and we'll keep talking about prejudice. So I think hopefully you laugh some, and you can see how the experience of this positive, what's considered to be a positive prejudice of, in this case, liking white men, can really be quite negative, where somebody just treats everything about your culture as homogenous, and you feel like that person doesn't actually like you for you, but likes you for something that they think you represent but isn't actually very accurate. So while we could say that a prejudice is positive, in general, the experience of prejudice is most likely to be negative because people are going to feel like they're being put into a box. So discrimination is an actual behavior, and so it's a behavior toward a person based on group membership, and it's generally considered negative. So if you have a judge who always gives harsher penalties to Black defendants than white defendants, then that judge is discriminating against Black defendants. However, I want to clarify, if you have a judge who gives a harsh penalty to a Black defendant, you cannot say that that judge is discriminating. What you have to do is look at whether there is a pattern of behavior. So one of the problems that we end up having in some of my class discussions is that people use an example of one person who is experiencing negative outcomes and they say it's discrimination. And the problem is that's not actually discrimination. What you have to do is you have to say there's a pattern where all people that are in a particular group are treated negatively relative to another group. So now that we've defined what discrimination is, let's talk about whether or not sexism exists against men. And the answer is definitely yes. So it is possible for men to experience sexism. So this is a kind of a sexist onesie. So the onesie is supposed to be funny because the idea is that this dad is so incompetent that he can't figure out how to put this thing on a baby. And I know many men that would be offended by this, that would say, I don't like the implication that I'm such a moron that I literally cannot figure out how to put a shirt on my kid. And if you watch videos or ads or TVs or anything, you oftentimes will see that men are being portrayed as incompetent when it comes to household things like doing the dishes or getting the kids to school or figuring out what to make for dinner. And it's generally meant to be very funny that this guy just can't get it together and then the wife comes in and saves the day. And frequently when I'm watching these, I think, there would be a huge outroar if the roles were reversed, where the woman was being portrayed as totally incompetent and the man was the one who came in and fixed everything. So this is the first example of me not trying to say that one group's experience is worse than the other, but I am trying to say that it's important to be aware of both groups' experiences, because if you trivialize the other group's experience, you're not really going to be listening to them and you're not going to be able to have an intelligent conversation with them. So the next slide gets even more controversial. I'm going to tackle a pretty controversial question, and we're going to talk about whether Black people can be racist. Now, there's a movie called Dear White People, which is about Black people's experiences on a college campus. It's not a documentary, it's a drama. And in the movie, this person, this student, makes an argument for why Black people can't be racist. And she does it very well and very eloquently. So rather than restate it myself, I will have you watch this clip and then come back to this lecture once you finish watching it. Okay, so she is essentially saying that because Black people can't benefit from cultural racism, Black people can't be racist. Well, the other side of that argument is that racism is just favoring one group over another. And if that's the case, then Black people certainly can be racist, because Black people can favor one group over another. And so from a social psychological perspective, we would say that it is possible for Black people to be racist. But, and this is important, again, we are not trying to say who is the worst person or who has experienced the most racism. While a Black person can indeed be racist, that Black person has most likely experienced large amounts of racism in his or her life. So it oversimplifies things to say either you experience racism or you behave in racist manners. And we are in college now and we understand that things aren't always so one way or the other. And so in this class, we'll be able to talk about how you can do both. You can be somebody who behaves in a racist manner, and you can be someone who experiences racism.